What's up, everybody? Welcome back to The Adventure. As usual, I am your host, Zach Pieper, the lead adventurer. That's right, I'm switching to pronouncing it Piper now because that's how it was originally pronounced. So a while back, Jordan Peterson interviewed Gad Saad, or Saeed, however you say that guy's last name. No offense to the individual in question. I'm just not 100% sure which way it is. And they covered quite a few things when they talked, but of particular interest to me is the conversation, at least the bits thereof, that focused on the religious endeavor and some of the nuances and cognitive dissonance that popped up that I thought were interesting. So we're going to get into it. I'm going to be giving some commentary early on, and then there's going to be a large section that I just let play with some more of my thoughts on the back end. So I'll see you guys there. Let's get to it.
Or is it reasonable to assume that something analogous happens on the religious front and that the fundamental conflict is a consequence of the predatory parasites twisting fundamentally axiomatic and necessary religious claims to their own devices and sowing discord as a consequence?
Well, I can't be so charitable as to give religion a free pass, because many of the religious narratives, certainly in the Abrahamic faiths, are precisely us versus them, right? So there is no way to misinterpret some of the teachings in many of these books, whether it be Deuteronomy, so the Old Testament, whether it be in certain Christian doctrines, and certainly when it comes to Islamic doctrines. It is very difficult to quote, misread, or mistranslate, and it's certainly difficult to tell someone who Arabic is their mother tongue that I'm misunderstanding what is being communicated, let's say, in some elements of the Islamic faith. My point here is not to uniquely bash Islam, because, as I said, all Abrahamic faiths have a us versus them mentality. So
while it is true that you can argue a us versus them mentality in Christianity, it is also true that the us versus them is not meant to be violent conflict. In Christianity, in the New Testament specifically, it's made clear that the Word is our weapon. We are called to peacefully convert the non-believer. Violence is only acceptable as a means of self-defense or defending the defenseless, and an honest read of Christianity will tell you that.
I think what happened in Lebanon is not some human co-opting of otherwise benign and loving religious narratives. Let's put it another way, and again, this you may not like because I'm borrowing from Richard Dawkins, and I know that you've been having a little tiff with him. Richard Dawkins famously said that the difference between an atheist and a very staunch believer is really very minimal. If we assume that there are 10,000 gods, the very religious person is an atheist on 9,999 gods, but is very fervently a believer in one, whereas the non-believer atheist is a non-believer on 10,000. So there's only a difference of 9,999 to 10,000. That strikes me as a pretty compelling argument.
And I would argue back that it only strikes you, Mr. Gad, as a compelling argument because you want to side with it. The fact of the matter is, the 9,999 to 10,000 argument is not a difference of one. It is the difference between yes and no. It is the difference between black and white. Using some crafty verbal framing does not change the actual nature of the argument. This is a perspective-based argument, and a bad faith one at that.
Let me put it another way. In The Consuming Instinct, which was one of my earlier books in 2011, I had a whole chapter where I was talking about the thought experiment of what might happen if an extraterrestrial being came to Earth shopping for the one good faith. And what I did there, I mean, some people might think that I was, being facetious, but actually I was being deadly serious. I said, take every single issue that you could think of, from the most consequential to the most banal, and I can find you two religions that purport the exact opposite prescription. Does God want you to eat prosciutto? Yes, if you're Catholic. Absolutely no, if you're Jewish or Muslim. What's God's view on homosexuality? I can give you some that are totally okay with it, some that are not. I mean, literally, I give a million. So how can you then argue for a specific religion when on any given point I can find two religions that are perfectly contradictory?
Okay. So I think I have an answer to that you might find at least interesting. So I forgot that in your book you laid out the rationale for nomological networks. Let me just develop that a little bit. And this is
Sure.
in your new book. Okay, so the idea of a nomological network is akin to the idea of sensory quintangulation. Let's call it that. And so everyone knows that we have 5 senses. Now, each of those senses uses a qualitatively different strategy of measurement, right? Somewhat independently evolved. And so our proposition as embodied biological organisms is that if something manifests itself simultaneously in the domains covered by the 5 dimensions of our senses, it's real, right? So what's real? You can taste it, you can touch it, you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it. If you can do all 5 of those, then there's a pretty damn good chance that it's real. Now, actually, that turned out not to be real enough. And that's partly why the development of language had some adaptive utility, because you and I can communicate, I can use your 5 senses transmitted to me through the linguistic domain to calibrate my 5 senses, and then we can do that en masse, and to a large degree, that's what science does. All right, so you take multiple independent sources of measurement, and if they converge, then you assume that there's something there. Fair enough so far?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. I would say, from what I've been able to understand, that that's what the Jungians did in their archetypal analysis. Now, you can debate, as the postmodernists have, about whether or not what they found was spurious. But in my Maps of Meaning book, what I tried to do was to take what the Jungians had discovered by constructing a nomological network of cross-cultural mythological analysis,
Yes.
and I tried to beat that against the measurement techniques of behavioral psychology and neuroscience. And I found, at least I claimed in that book, to have found like a substantive, non-trivial, and surprising degree of overlap. So let me, and I think this is relevant to your book on happiness. Now, you tell me what you think about this, because happiness doesn't just mean transitory hedonic joy. And you certainly don't think that, because that isn't how you live. So the core element of the hero archetype is the injunction that you should advance courageously in the face of threat if said threat stands as an obstacle between you and a valid goal.
Yes.
Right. And so that's different than rabbit mythology, which would be when you see a wolf, freeze. The human myth is, no, when you encounter a threat, you explore it until you master it. Okay,
Right.
and as far as I can tell, all the variants of hero mythology are basically that, right? It's the dragon fight, is that you find the terrible predator, and that's what a dragon is. It's an emblem of the predator. And you encounter that voluntarily, and as a consequence, you get the virgin, so that's on the sexual front, and you get the gold, and that's on the material front. And so, the Jungians, to their credit, and I really do think to their credit, pointed out that underlying narrative structure makes itself manifest cross-culturally in a multitude of forms. Now, unfortunately, to understand that, you have to throw yourself pretty deeply into that body of research, right? And it's pretty arcane, and Jung thought symbolically, and so he's not a thinker who's particularly amenable to people whose primary mode of thought is rational rather than pattern recognition.
Mhm.
Right. So,
Right.
but like I do think the Jungians used a nomological network, and I think that the core religious doctrine that they converged on was something like the universal validity of the hero myth and the redemptive quality of that courageous advancement in the face of the unknown. And so that's a place where you could, because your question was, well, there's all these competing religious claims, right? And I'd say, well, there's no way I can offer a contrary perspective to that viewpoint given the multitude of contradictory religious claims. But then I would say there's a hierarchy of claims, and some of them are more central. And there is a convergence at the level of what claims are most central. And I think the convergence is analogous to your proposition that you should abide by the truth in your exploration and your communicative enterprise. And I think that's associated with the kind of happiness that you're writing about in your new book, right? A kind of deep happiness.
Right. I agree largely with all that you've said about the universal myths that the Jungians talk about.
What I find so interesting about atheists is that so often the smart ones agree with a lot of the argumentation surrounding Christianity, but then they deny the conclusion. Here, Mr. Saad agrees that the central claim of the religious enterprise is often the same through many iterations of different religions. But earlier, he used the 999 to 10,000 argument, which I find to be cognitively dissonant. And especially if you agree that religion has overlapping central themes and beliefs that are echoed through many, many iterations of different religions, and you agree that a convergence of observation indicates the presence of the observed, then it seems to me that any honest man would find himself at least agnostic. And in my humble opinion, the jump from agnostic to Christian is a baby step. Not least of which because it stands to reason that if an all-powerful and loving God wanted people to praise him, then he would make peoples that praised him successful and prosperous. And the Christian church has created the unstoppable titan that is Western civilization. Western civilization has been the dominant force on Earth since the Roman Catholic Church came into existence. So, just a thought. Hey, thanks for joining me on the adventure. I appreciate you being here. The best way you can support me is by hitting that sub button, sharing the content with your friends, and we'll catch you on the next one.